Well, there is a difference between an adventure and a quest. All right, there's a difference. There's an adventure and a quest, two different things. An adventure is something you take off on, but ultimately you know you will return. For instance, if you decide this summer we're gonna take the kids to as many parks as possible, and so you just load up the car and you drive to state parks and national parks, and you're just doing everything you can. Well, eventually summer will end, school will start over, and you'll have to come home. And basically, after the adventure, you pick up where you left off. You resume life as it was. A quest, on the other hand, is different because on a quest, there's no guarantee of a return. And even if you did return, things would never be the same. It makes me think of the movie Interstellar, one of my favorite movies, big Matthew McConaughey fan. But in the movie Interstellar, Earth has become uninhabitable or is increasingly uninhabitable. And so a group of astronauts have to take a mission to find a new planet, to find a new home for humanity. And as they embark on this journey, there's no guarantee of a return. They know that this might cost their lives, that if they do come back, that because of time, they might not know their families as they once did. It's a totally different thing where it's like, man, we're leaving for the unknown and we will never be the same. Well, today, as we look at the life of Abraham, what we're going to see is that God didn't call him to an adventure. He called him to a quest, to leave his home, knowing he would never return and knowing that things would never be the same. And what we're going to see is that Abraham is actually the model of faith for us to follow. And so that should lead us to ask the question, is my Christian journey, is my Christian life more of an adventure or is it a quest? All right, so Genesis chapter 11. We're gonna get to chapter 12 for the bulk of it, but I want to start a couple of verses before chapter 12. Real quick to catch you up. We're going through the book of Genesis this summer, surveying it on Sunday mornings, diving deeper through our podcast and study guide Monday through Saturday. So in chapters 1 and 2, God creates and everything is good. Like everything is perfect. It's very, very good. But then just 3 chapters deep into the story, everything goes wrong. So last week we looked at Adam and Eve, the fall of humanity, and how rebellion broke into God's good creation and fractured everything. Now, from chapter 3 on, so from chapters 3 to 11, what we see is there is murder, there's deception, there's nudity, there's drunkenness, there's increased rebellion. And so as we're reading these stories from chapters 3 to 11, the question becomes like, is this thing ever going to turn around? Is there any hope for humanity? Because it seems like things are just increasingly getting worse and worse and worse as we read about one failure after another failure after another failure. And so is there any hope? Will this thing ever turn around? And that's where we pick up in chapter 11, starting in verse 27. It says, "Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah fathered Abram, Nahor, and Haran fathered Lot." So real quick, as you're studying Genesis, whenever it says these are the generations, that is cueing us in that we are entering into a new section of the book. So this is beginning a new section. It's about to be a genealogy. And I think for a lot of us, when we get to genealogies, we're like, let's skip it and get to the good stuff, right? Especially in the Bible where there's a bunch of names that we don't even know how to pronounce. It's like, can we just skip this stuff? But it makes me think of my grandma, right? Now, there are all these resources you can use, whether 23andMe or Ancestry.com, but you can trace your family line. My grandma didn't have that ability, so she just got a pen and paper and started tracing the Martin family line. And so she goes back to generation after generation after generation, eventually getting to Ireland. She takes her own little trip, old lady, goes to Ireland on her own, visits the Martin family castle, brings home a crest so we can see what it looks like. And so I know that Martins, at least my Martins, we come from Ireland. And so I go to New York City and go to Ellis Island, and I'm looking at all the Martin names, all the immigrants that have come in, and I'm like, this is awesome. So I called my grandma, and I'm thinking she's going to know the exact name. And so I was like, Grandma, which Martin are we? And she goes, oh, we snuck down through Canada. And I was like, I'm an illegal immigrant. Like what in the world? So all that to say, though, when I see these names, it's interesting because it's my family. And so when we get to genealogies in scripture, maybe you're like, I'm not interested, but this is very interesting to God's family. Specifically, the first people that would have received this book, right? It would have been the nation of Israel as they're journeying through the wilderness, headed towards the promised land. So for them, this is their family tree. These names are important. And so as we read these names, we're going to meet people like Terah, Abram, Sarah, and Lot. So let's just keep going in verse 28. It says, Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his kindred in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, and the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Ishka. Now Sarai was barren, she had no children. All right, verse 31, it says, Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. So Terah picks up his whole family, and he's going to move them from Ur to the land of Canaan. It says this, but when they came to Haran, they settled there, so they don't make it all the way to Canaan. And it says the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Okay, so I want to point out a couple of things here because this is important background information. So who in the world is Terah? Okay, who is this guy? So if you start in Genesis 3:15, that's the first announcement of the gospel where we are told a descendant of Eve would one day come and destroy sin and death. And so now God helps us to follow that line where we're saying like, okay, how is this going to happen? And so from there we get to Noah. From Noah, he's got 3 sons. 2 of them are not godly at all. One is, right? And so then through that godly son, we get 9 generations deep until we get to Terah. Right? So then Terah gives way to Abram, but this is kind of following the line of hope. But so Terah is supposed to be the kind of like the grandfather of the hope that we're going to read about. The only problem is if you read Joshua, a book to come, Joshua chapter 24, verse 2, we find out that Terah was actually a Gentile pagan. He's not a God-fearing man like his great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa. He's actually an idol worshiper, right? So he's not a godly man. And so we see like if he's supposed to father or be a grandfather to the hope, it seems like, man, he's not setting the stage for this to happen because he is worshiping other gods. All right, well, that brings us to Abram and Sarai. And so real quick, Abram's name will eventually change to Abraham. And Abram simply means father, and Abraham means father of many. And I might use those interchangeably on accident, but I heard a pastor say it's like this. Abram means dad, and Abraham means big daddy. Like it's like there's basically the same word, all right, same name, father of many. So, but when it comes to Abram and Sarai, what we have to understand is that this is one of the most important couples in all of human history. This is one of the most important couples in all of human history because think about it, right? 3 major religions all trace their lineage back to Abraham and Sarah. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Look at the world population, billions of people, and look at how many of them fall into the category of Christian or Muslim. And so for us, when it comes to like the world and understanding humanity as we experience it, it almost all traces back to understanding the story of Abraham and Sarah. So like this is literally one of the most important couples in all of human history for us to understand humanity as we know it. And so what do we know about Abram? All right, well, Abram, we find out that he's old. We'll find that out in a few verses. He's 75 years old. We know from Terah that he does not come from a godly family. And even though just because your dad's not godly doesn't mean that you're necessarily ungodly, but at this point in Genesis 11, Abraham is not a God-fearing Jew. He is also a Gentile, pagan idol worshiper. Okay, so at this point, Abram is not a godly man. Then we find out that his wife Sarai is actually barren. This is a big deal in a culture where a woman's value would have been measured in her ability to be fertile, right? But it's actually a bigger deal because, like I said, if you start in 3:15 and the descendant of Eve and trace the line as God is saying, and this is how this line is going to continue, what we see is Abram is actually the line of hope. right? So this line for like our hope for someone to step into history to defeat sin and to defeat death, it comes through Abram. But if his wife can't have kids, that means the hope comes to a conclusion, right? So if she's barren, that means the hope of the world is about to come to an end because she can't have kids. So this is actually a huge note that we need to make, that Sarah is unable to have children. Right? But there's also one more lesson to learn in these verses. Like I said earlier, that Terah takes his family and he's going to move them from Ur to Canaan. Now, Ur was one of 3 major cities in ancient Mesopotamia. So if you study kind of ancient Mesopotamia, Ur was basically the LA or New York City. It's the place that things were happening. It's the place where culture was influenced from. And so they're leaving the cultural center of influence and moving to a place that was undesirable, like Kansas, right? It's like they're moving to Kansas. Who wants to live in Kansas? Okay, but they don't make it fully there. They stop in a town called Haran. But this note is important because this move does 2 things, right? One, it gives Abram the experience of knowing what it's like to uproot your whole family and to move. So he knows the weight, he knows the complexities, he knows what it means to take everything you know and to leave it behind and to move somewhere new. So he has this experience of moving as a kid, but also what it does is his dad's intention was to take him to the land of Canaan. They don't make it there, but he was mentally prepared. Like in his mind, he was like, we're going to Kansas, right? He was mentally ready for that reality. So at this point, Abram is prepared experientially and mentally for the calling that God is going to put on his life. There's a little lesson in here that I don't want to move past too quickly on, right? And here's what you have to understand. All of Abram's past was preparing him for his future. Okay? All of Abram's past was preparing him for his future. And why that's so important is, man, my heart hurts for so many of our 20 to 30-year-olds because I hear this all the time where they're like, I'm just not where I thought I would be in life. I thought I would be married by now. I thought I would be a little bit higher up in the company. I thought I would be a homeowner, and I feel like all my friends are getting homes, and I'm just still renting, and I feel like I'm just behind. And so maybe you're here today, and you're like, I'm not where I want to be. Understand this, God is using your past to prepare you for your future. And faithfulness in present circumstances will prepare you for future opportunities. So maybe you're not where you need to be right now or where you want to be. Trust me, God is using this season of your life to prepare you for your future. It's not wasted. Be faithful where you are. All right, let's keep moving here. Verses 1 through 3 of chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, go or leave from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Okay, so God shows up and he calls Abram. Now think about it. When do we call people? Okay, if your AC breaks and your house is 84 degrees in the middle of summer, who are you going to call? Right? Not the Ghostbusters. You're going to call the AC man because he is qualified to fix your unit, right? And so Abram here is God calling him, but let's just face it, Abram is not qualified. I mean, first, he's old. The dude's like 75 years old. Think about this. I'm 40. If I'm in the yard doing yard work and I fall, my kids should laugh. They're like, Dad just bit it, right? My parents are in their 70s. If they fall, we're concerned. Did they break something? Are they okay? Do we need to call an ambulance? Because they're old. So here he is. He's old. We find out that his wife was barren. I mean, she's not even able to have children. And then he's living in this land that has no cultural influence. So I mean, how can the world be changed from Kansas, right? It's like there's no influence happening. And if you're from Kansas today, I'm sorry. You're just like, man, I really feel beat up. We could say Memphis, all right? So anyway, so all that to say, he's not a qualified person, but listen to this. Remember this, write it down if you need to. Here's the truth of the gospel. God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called. right? And so Abram is totally unqualified, but God is calling him because God is going to qualify him, right? And so here Abraham gets this call. And 2 weeks ago, we talked about this main point was that when God speaks and we obey, the result is good, right? We see that in the rhythm of creation. When God speaks and we obey, the result is good. God is speaking, right? He is speaking. And if Abram obeys, there are 3 good things that will come. One, he will be a great nation. That means that his children will multiply and multiply and multiply. He will be given a great name, which means that his reputation will be magnified. And he will be given a great purpose because through him, God is going to bless not just the nation, but bless all people. And so the question is like, okay, well, will Abram obey? How will he respond? And think about this. Let's say that you're moving from out west or up north to Johnson City. And you're like, not that anybody's doing that. And so you're moving here and you talk to a realtor and like, we need a house. And they go, okay, give me $400,000 and I'll get you a great house. Are you going to be like, cool? Or are you going to go, wait, what? Where is the house? Can I get a Google Earth picture to see kind of like, is it surrounded by shady things? Like, does it have a basement? Is it redone, remodeled? Is it a new build? Like, what? You want details if you're going to give someone $400,000 to buy you a house. But there's like, just trust me, right? So here, God has told him it's going to be great, but he's given him very few details. He's not telling them when it's going to take place, how it's going to take place. He doesn't even know where the land is yet. I mean, there's no details. So how is Abram going to respond? Well, look at verses 4-6. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran, and Abram took Sarai his wife and Lot his brother's son and all their possessions that they had gathered and the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they went out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land of the place at Shechem to the oak of Moreh, and at that time the Canaanites were in the land. Okay, that word went is immediate and unquestioned obedience. Right? Like this is not Abram sitting on it and going like, let me weigh my options. It's just immediate, unquestioned. God has spoken, I will obey. And this is so important for you to hear because some language I would love for us to be familiar with as a church is I want us to always be asking, what is my next step of obedience? Because we don't want to just push the boundaries, like how much is too much, how far is too far. We want to live a life where we are stepping closer to Christ and closer to Christ and closer to Christ. And so everybody has a next step of obedience. So when God gives you a step of obedience to take, I want you to hear this. It's like your feet are in wet cement. Okay? When God calls you to obedience, it's like your feet are in wet cement. The longer you wait, the more it dries, and the more it dries, the harder it gets to move. So we need to have this rhythm or this follow the model of Abram where our obedience should be immediate and unquestioned because when God speaks and we obey, the result is good. All right? And so let's keep looking here. Abram becomes our biblical model of faith. And so if you want a definition of like, what is biblical faith? You can simply say biblical faith is believing God enough to do what he says. And so when Abram believes God and does what he says, he's not operating off of feelings. He's operating off of trust. I mean, do you think Abram felt like moving? Do you think he was like, this is great. I would love to leave everything that's comfortable and go to a foreign land that I don't know. Like, no, he didn't feel like it, but he trusted in God's goodness and love. So faith is not based off feelings. It's based off of trust. It's believing God enough to do what he says. Okay, quick side note here. You'll notice that God told him to leave all of his kindred, and he brought Lot with him. I've skipped over that for my whole Christian life, right? And so a couple of weeks ago, my youngest daughter, if you want to know like a way to your dad's heart, like my youngest daughter goes, Dad, can we go to the tree house and read the Bible? It's like, how do you say no to that? You know, like yes. So we go out to the tree house. We're actually reading in Genesis, and we come to this story. And I was like, and Abraham obeyed God. And she goes, well, Dad. She's like, but he brought Lot with him. Didn't God tell him not to do that? And I was like, Google that later. Like I was like stumped by an 8-year-old. And so as you're looking into it, here's what's cool. This is actually him bringing Lot with him is compromised obedience. And compromised obedience leads to complications and conflict. And so Moses, including this tidbit in the story, is actually meant to grab our attention. So we should be thinking like, wait, there's the compromise here. What type of complication, what type of conflict will that cause? So as you continue to read through the story, just take note of what happens because Lot came with him. It's not good. There is conflict and complication because of this compromise to his obedience. So that's cueing us in that there's going to be some drama because of the compromise. All right? Look at verse 7. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there, he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on his west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negeb. Okay, and so when it says that God appeared, this is actually God's first physical appearance since the Garden of Eden. This is God's first physical appearance since the Garden of Eden. And so he appears and he tells Abram that like, hey, your offspring are going to inherit this land. What's interesting is if you read this in the Hebrew, that word offspring is actually singular, not plural. Okay, so this is controversial, but the promise of the land is actually not to offspring plural as in the nation of Israel. It's actually singular to the person of Jesus Christ. So the promised land is for Jesus, not Israel. Let's not get in debate here, but just like you're like, what do I do with that? But the offspring is singular, and what's interesting is that same word for offspring last used was in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, where we learn about this offspring from Eve who will one day defeat sin and death. So this promise is ultimately going to be fulfilled through Jesus. All right, and so what's cool, and a little side note here, Ai means ruin, and Bethel means house of God. And so the picture we have here is God walking from the land of ruin to the house of God. And once he gets to where he's going, he sets up an altar and he worships. Right? So as we're reading this, we have to ask the question, like, why is this so important? I mean, this is a pivotal chapter or section in the whole Bible. So why is chapter 12 so important? Well, if you're reading the story, Genesis 1 and 2, things are good. Genesis 3, things take a hard left in the wrong direction. And once they take that hard left, they just continue going further and further and further away from God, right? Chapter 12 is the second turning point. The first turning point is turning wrong, but now in chapter 12, there's another turning point where we begin to see how God plans to redeem and restore all that sin has broken. All right, and so this is actually, you could call it the great reversal, where Adam and Eve's disobedience brought about curses. What we're going to see is that Abraham, Sarah's obedience is going to lead to blessing. All right, and so what do we do with this? Well, there's a rhythm there's a rhythm of creation. When God speaks, we obey, the result is good. There's this rhythm here, okay? There's another rhythm we see in this story that I can't get past. And here's the rhythm that we'll see starting in Genesis 12, and we'll see it through the rest of Scripture. It's that there is calling leads to faith, and faith leads to worship, right? Abraham was called by God. He responded in faith, and after he responded in faith, it led him to worship. So this rhythm is important. And so what we need to ask, the big question for us to ask is, what's God calling you to do, and will you do it? Right? That's the one question I want you to leave today with. What's God calling you to do, and will you do it? Right? So here's, if you're like, Jeff, what is God calling me to do? Because I don't hear him audibly speaking to me. All right, so let's just say this. When God says go in verse 1 of chapter 12 or leave, it means get out or move away from. So here's what I'm confident of. God is calling you to move away from things that are not of Christ and to move towards things that are of Christ. In other words, he's calling you to follow Jesus. That is the calling on all of our lives, to move away from things that are not of Christ and to move towards the things that are of Christ. And if you will do this, this is not an adventure. This is not you like, okay, I'm moving away from this and towards this, but I'm going to come back. No. It's a quest where you are leaving this behind and you are now setting your face towards Christ and Christ alone. So God is calling you to move away from things that are not of Christ and to move towards the thing that are of Christ. And here's what, like, as you're wrestling with this for yourself, I know for some of you, I'm going to say for some of you, this might be a call for physical location change. For somebody like that, like it's like Abraham, God is calling you to physically leave where you are. Maybe you're in a roommate situation that's just not good, and it's like, you got to get out of that house. Or maybe you've got a past in Johnson City, and for years, you've tried to just get out of it, but there's so many things in this town that keep kind of pulling you back, and you need to move to a new town to get a fresh start. Like for some of you, this very well might be a call to move, but I would say for most of us, right? For most of us, it's not about changing locations, but changing who we are, where we are. That God is calling us to live like Christ within the spheres of influence God has placed us. All right, God is calling you to live like Christ within the spheres of influence that God has placed you. So we've got calling leads to faith. So what is God calling you to do? Will you do it? And then the third thing is worship. I love that Abram set up altars because one is setting up an altar is staking claim. This land belongs to my God. But it's also a way of worshiping. And so I would say, metaphorically speaking, we should all set up altars on our hearts as a way of saying, my life is not my own, it belongs to God. So when I think about my own calling in life, God called me to full-time vocational ministry. And the first time that I was wrestling with the first ministry job that I would take, it was not comfortable. It was like a foreign land. Like it was to a place that I had no family, a place that I had no friends, a place that I didn't understand the culture. It was like moving to a foreign land. And so I talked to my mentor. I was processing things, but I'll never forget, I got down on my knees to pray. And I said, okay, God, it'd be comfortable for me to move back here. God, it'd be comfortable for me to stay in this current place. But God, I didn't give my life to comfort. I gave my life to you. And if you're calling me to go, open the door and I'll go. And I felt a complete peace, and the door opened and I went. And so I don't know what God's calling you to do, but I have this hunch that maybe you're like, this will not be comfortable. Or maybe you're feeling like if I do what I feel like God's calling me to do, it's going to come with great risk. And so if you're struggling to take that step of obedience, here's what you do. You look to Jesus. Jesus is our example as the better Abraham, okay? Jesus is the better Abraham. Abraham was promised a great name. Jesus was given the name above every name, that every knee should bow and call him Lord, all right? Abram left the security and wealth of his homeland to move to a foreign land into the unknown. Jesus left the security and comfort of his father's side to come to earth. As you read the story of Abraham, you'll see that he often told lies to save his life. Jesus came and spoke truth, knowing it would cost him his life so that he could save our lives. You see, we want to look to Jesus and the way that he lived as our ultimate example. So think on the life of Christ, the reality of who he is and what he has done, to the point that it changes your heart to say, even if it's risky, even if it doesn't feel safe, even if it's not comfortable, I'm not making a decision based off feelings. I'm making a decision based off of trust. And I trust that you are good, and I trust that you love me. And so, God, if you're calling me towards it, I'm going to do it. God, thank you for your word. I ask that in this time of response, that you would speak to your people in a way that they would feel confident in knowing what you're calling them to do. And God, as we think about what step of obedience we need to take today, there might be fear, it might be scary, it might be risky, it might not be comfortable. But God, we don't want to make a step based off of feelings. We want to do it because of trust. And God, you have proven over and over and over again that you are good and that you love us more than we could ever know. And God, help us to trust who you are. Give us a greater confidence of your goodness so that we can take the step that we need to take. And God, as we step closer to you, God, just let it be powerful for our lives and for our church, that we would have influence for Christ in the spheres that you've placed us. God, it's in your holy name we pray. Amen.